Welcome to Trust Talk. Today's guest is Andrew Winston, a global expert on sustainability and co-author of the book Net Positive, showing how to build companies that profit by fixing the world's problems, not creating them. He wonders whether we can sustain in using the Earth's resources as we do now, and if world crises like COVID and the war in Ukraine can negatively influence the path of sustainability. Part of the success of any organization is to put the interests of society before self-interest. A net positive company improves well-being for everyone it impacts and at all scales. Every product, every operation, every region and country, and for every stakeholder, including employees, suppliers, communities, customers, and even future generations and the planet itself. Your host today, Severin DeWitt.
Andrew, welcome to Trust Talk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You wrote several books, the last one with former Unilever CEO Paul Polman, called Net Positive. The main theme of the book is, if companies want to, and I'm quoting, thrive today and tomorrow, they must become net positive, giving more to the world than they take. So how do companies do that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's I guess first define what we mean. It sounds easy to say give more than you take, but we're talking about companies that their goal is to help solve the world's problems, and that's how they profit and grow. And they look for solutions rather than really contributing to the world's problems, which has kind of been the normal course for business so far. And the logic here is that we're facing enormous challenges with very limited time now. Climate change is very pressing. Inequality has gotten far worse. And the business community just has tremendous power and influence and needs to be part of the solution. It can't be a government only solution. It's really got to come from all of us, all kind of aspects of society. And we define Net Positive as a company that improves the well-being of everyone that they impact. And that's their customers, their consumers, their employees, the communities they operate in, through everything they do, every product and service and every factory, every country they operate in. And this is the North Star that we're putting out there. And companies, some are on the path, some are doing it in parts of their business, and others are very far away from it, but it's really the level of ambition that we need today.
Our podcast main theme is trust. Almost all companies in the world's main assets are intangibles, as you wrote, apart from intellectual property, of course. Especially in the consumer goods industry, brand value is key. Trust plays a major role in establishing brand value. I'm sure you have strong views on that.
Yeah, look, trust is, there's many quotes about it. I think you use it in some of your descriptions of what you do. It can be lost very quickly. It takes a long time to build up. In our story in the book, it plays a really critical role because the steps we talk about are the things that companies need to do to kind of move down this path. It starts with a very kind of internal focus and looking at your purpose and the purpose of the organization, the purpose of you as a leader, and starting to set really big goals, just really understanding what the world needs. And then there's this important connection of building trust with the external world. So you can get to this place of having the kinds of partnerships and collaborations that we need to solve really big problems. And without that trust built up, it's going to be nearly impossible, right? You can't have a very functional partnership unless there's some level of trust. And there's a lot of ways of building that, but one of the core aspects is really transparency, right? Just being open about your business, being open, sharing your successes and your problems, being humble. And I think in part just doing the right thing as a business, doing what you think is right. And that's how you start to build trust with all your stakeholders.
Sustainability is one of the main themes of what you do, or more generally what we now call ESG, or environmental, social and governance. What drove you to be such a proponent of sustainability?
It was really practical. I got into this after about a decade in regular business. I was a strategy, marketing, business development kind of person. I worked at Boston Consulting Group right out of college and I had a normal view of business, but I kind of had a values check around 2000, 2001. And, at the end of the dot-com boom and things were crashing. And I just thought about, what do I really care about? And I cared about the environment, but it's always for me been very practical. If you kind of step back and look at our system, capitalism, the way we use resources, it's just kind of clear we can't do this indefinitely, right? We're overusing resources. We can't function like this forever and continue to see growth of what's now 8 billion people will be 9, 10 billion who have increasing material needs. So it was always kind of a practical thing for me, which is if we want business to continue, we want to improve quality of life for all, we're going to need to rethink how we do things. And then I think over time, I've become much more focused as well on the social side and just the vast inequality that we've built that I think is undermining connection and our ability to solve problems together, as you know, most of the wealth has funneled upwards. So these kind of dual challenges of climate change and inequality are just practical to me. We have to solve them or business isn't going to function very well.
In your book, Net Positive, you mention 5 ways to build trust. One of those is put the interest of society before self-interest. But isn't a company's self-interest to produce products benefiting your customers, your employees, and your stakeholders?
Well, really, they're not at odds. I think you're not going to probably have a very successful business in a way if you're not serving, as you said, products, not serving customers, making their lives better in some way, making your employees' lives better. But this is part of the path to putting society first. You're putting stakeholders first. I think a net positive company will make products and services that have an impact and help build a just, thriving world. But when we made that point in the book, we're talking in some ways kind of specifically about entering communities, entering developing markets, new countries, and whether you're going in with the attitude of how best can we serve this community and group of customers and profit from it. We sell products, we're a company, not really the attitude of how can we just make money off these people, which is really what a lot of companies do. It's really how can we take resources out. It's about relationship building based on a genuine level of caring, but honesty. It's okay to say, yeah, we're in business. We want to do well also, but we're going to do well by serving the community and serving customers and making their lives better. I think these things go together. Having a purpose as a business and serving through that business is how you build deeper connections. It goes back to that level of trust that I think builds a strong business over time.
In Harvard Business Review, you and Paul published an article, the Net Positive Manifesto, where you wrote, "Net positive advocacy is not selfless." What do you mean by that?
Well, when we talk about net positive advocacy, what we mean is that companies have to make as part of their strategies and how they impact the world, really think about their impact on policy and on politicians. You know, in the US, where I'm based, it's really a legalized form of corruption. Frankly, you can put as much money as you want into the system as a company. But around the world, there's levels of corruption, there's levels of influence that are pretty dramatic. And so if we're going to solve these kind of shared challenges, a company has to take some responsibility for the policies that they're helping create or that they're, through their silence, allowing to happen. So what we say is it's not selfless, meaning we're looking for companies to help create policy with government together that does benefit them, right? You're solving a shared problem. You're making the sustainable path easier or cheaper. You're helping build, say, the market for renewable materials. You're helping build the kinds of policies, or you're helping create policies that help reduce carbon emissions so everyone is better off, but do it in a way that the company can benefit from. So it's just really a difference between walking in and saying, give me a tax break, or how can we use our capital and get the right kinds of rules in place so that we are specifically advantaged. And that's the way it's been really with government relations and policy, but it really doesn't take us very far. So it's about having kind of a deeper conversation and walking into Brussels or DC and saying, what are the goals of the community we're working in, the continent? How can we help solve them? And how will that help our business as well? It really works together.
Some critics say that the word sustainability is being used to mean too many things to too many people, losing its true value as a helpful reference to consumers making the right purchasing decision. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, sure. I mean, as really all large companies now are at the table talking about sustainability, or they're calling it ESG now, environmental, social, and governance. When a topic gets kind of broad enough and common enough, it can lose some of its focus. And I think that's partly what's happening with ESG. ESG is a fairly meaningless statement in and of itself. It just says, here's some things, some categories of business, your environmental and your social impacts and your governance. How do you manage these issues that you should be paying attention to? But it's an acronym, right? It's almost as meaningless as human resources. So if someone says we're doing ESG, that doesn't really tell you very much more than saying we do R&D. Okay, well, what kind of R&D? Is it in the right direction? Is it actually helping your business? Is it leaving you positioned well for the future? So I think we do need some context, as companies talk about doing this, that they're doing this work to build a net positive business, or regenerative is a word that people are using a lot, that there's an outcome, that we're shooting for a more sustainable outcome for the business and for society, and not just kind of broadly talking about doing good works. It can get very vague, right? You have to, I think, get much more specific about outcomes. We need to see carbon emissions come down, wages go up, living wages, human rights problems disappear in the supply chain. These are the things that need to happen on the ground.
French President Emmanuel Macron recently said that the French agricultural sector will aim for agricultural independence, giving productivity over sustainable agriculture goals in the European Union's Green Deal to deal with a post-Ukraine Europe. Are these the first cracks in the pursuit of sustainability?
Well, we're living in a complicated time, right? And look, life's complicated. There are certainly signs that some important elements of the sustainability discussion and journey are at risk. War tends to do that. We're talking about a really extreme situation, which could be leading to a world-scale war, again, first time in 80 years. The pandemic did this as well. It slowed some things, but some things accelerated because of it. And so there's definitely a need for some level of independence in countries when they're worried about resources. And that might mean they prioritize just production over how things are produced. And that's partly what you're asking. But at the same time, we're seeing this acceleration in a bunch of EU countries to get away from Russian oil and gas. So they're accelerating some of their investments and efforts to get to more renewables or to get to electric vehicles. I saw one country was about to retire some nuclear plants and says they're not going to do that right now. They're going to pause that. So we might see an acceleration away from oil and gas, which actually improves our sustainability performance. It actually gets us faster to a clean economy. I don't think we know how this is going to play out exactly. We'll see.
Let's shift to the investors in the company. Do you see some investors in a company becoming more critical about reaching sustainability goals if that means that it hurts profitability?
Well, look, it's kind of a classic, really false narrative. There's been this belief that somehow sustainability is anti-business or not profitable. I honestly, I get a version of that question in every conversation I've had for probably 15 to 20 years. I mean, almost literally every conversation. It's the question everybody has. But if you step back for a second, it's really only things that are called sustainability in business that really get asked this question, because everything in business is a capital choice, right? Everything is a cost. People say, well, it's costly to do sustainability, but everything is a cost. Every employee is a cost. Every capital expense is a cost. These things are investments, right? So the question is, what are you investing in? You don't really ever hear someone say, oh, you shouldn't do innovation because it hurts profitability, which of course it does in the short run. If you're going to go put money into R&D, you're going to lower your income, your profit margins right now for the future. So it's really about the kind of time frame we're talking about, short or long-term value creation. There are many things that fall under the sustainability banner that are very short-term benefits. Getting more efficient in your business, changing lighting, moving to renewable energy now is just more efficient and cheaper. But there are things that take longer investments, right? To create more sustainable products, to raise wages potentially for people so they're living, have a living wage. But the question is, how does that create value for the business? How does that create value to have lower turnover, deeper connections, to have that intangible value that we talked about earlier, which, as you said, besides intellectual property, there's a whole bunch of things that are intangible that are value for the business, not externalities, not value for nature, but actual value for the business that we don't put numbers on. And sustainability often builds that kind of value in a really dramatic way as it improves your resilience, reduces your risks, deepens your connections to stakeholders. So I think there's just always been this incredibly false narrative that actually leads people down a very short-term, narrow path where they're not actually building what's best for their business over the long term.
Some of these problems that we face seem to be far away. It seems like a challenge for, let's say, a consumer products company to take responsibility for consumption levels, or a country, depending on the export of palm oil, take responsibility for climate change.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you're picking up in the book, really the core principle that we lay out as a net positive company is taking ownership, taking responsibility for all the impacts you have on the world, whether they're intended or not. And there's a quote we use in the book that's actually 2,000 years old from a rabbi in the first century that I think is just something that's been important in my life to think about, which is that the quote is some version of, it's not your responsibility to take on all the work or to finish the work of perfecting the world, but you are not free to desist from it either. You're not free from responsibility either. So we've had a style of business for decades that's been, hey, if we can externalize costs, not our problem. So I think it's important to realize that by saying, hey, we play a role as a consumer products company in the consumption lifestyle or how many fossil fuels we're using, that you're not solely responsible. No company's big enough. That's part of the core idea of the book is even Unilever or Walmart. None of them are big enough to solve these problems. So you don't have to take these on alone. You don't have sole responsibility, but acting like you have no impact on the decline of the planet's ability to support us, that isn't right either. So we know that there's somewhere in between total responsibility and no responsibility that's right. And we've been taking the path of no responsibility, and that's leading us down a very dangerous path.
I had a question, but maybe you answered that already a little bit. Shortage of raw materials, broken supply chains, soaring fossil fuel prices, a threatening famine in many parts of the world due to economic uncertainty, and war raging in the world's largest grain supplier. Do these concerns overshadow the focus on sustainability?
Well, look, it depends on how intense are these problems. If you're in Ukraine literally running for your life and a refugee, yeah, you're not going to be worrying too much about your electric vehicle or how your home is powered. You're leaving with a suitcase and hopefully surviving. War is unique, a very kind of unique human pathway that has a destructive power and a level of dehumanization that we keep falling into, right? Every generation. And of course, that's hurting our progress toward a thriving world. Right now, every day is less thriving. There's millions of people being hurt. But there's things that come out of this. And again, soaring fossil fuel prices, they hurt in the short run, but they can drive deeper change. If the threats that are happening now help us rethink things. I mean, you mentioned broken supply chains. That was a problem during the pandemic. It wasn't a war-based thing. It was that we discovered that most multinationals had built supply chains for efficiency. Kind of comes back to everything we've been talking about, that the model of business has been lowest cost right away. Well, that leaves you a not very resilient business. So when something goes wrong in one part of your supply chain, either because factory shuts down because of a pandemic, or there's a flood or a drought or a fire because of climate change, and you make something in one place, the whole supply chain stops. So we have to have more balance between this efficiency and the kind of diversity that gives you resilience and the kind of interdependence, this balance of making stuff so that you can kind of protect your people and have enough food and energy when there's these breakdowns, but also this level of interdependence that we all have. It's the constant balancing act. And obviously war throws it all off pretty dramatically. But if we learned something in the pandemic, it was that companies and people could switch and kind of dramatically move how they did things pretty fast. Companies discovered they were shifting entire supply chains in weeks that they thought was going to take months or years. And all of us changed our lifestyles pretty quickly. I just wish, frankly, as this war started, that my own president and European leaders had actually asked us to do something. I think what's changed in society in kind of a very, again, profit-focused kind of neoliberal economic model the last 50 years is we don't seem to ask anyone to sacrifice anything. I mean, what if we had said to everyone, okay, Russia's now doing something evil. Everyone cut their natural gas use 20% as fast as you can. Turn up the thermostat, carpool so you're using less oil. I'm not taking lightly how hard this is. Some of this is impossible. Some people can't reduce, but some of us can, and business can in many ways. So why haven't we been asked to do anything? All we're being told is we're going to do something about this inflation and do something about these high prices so you don't have to suffer. Well, maybe we should share a little bit in the sacrifice for the people who are suffering. This is off topic from the core of my work and book, which is this isn't a sacrifice to be more sustainable in the long run. We're talking now about kind of a situation with war where I think maybe there has to be Why aren't we doing that?
Our generation have become a bunch of spoiled kids, of course. And
I mean, I think we joke. I just saw a funny tweet from a millennial kind of writer said, the boomers like to make fun of millennials or Gen Z for being soft or getting, participation trophies and always getting rewarded. And they said, look, you're the ones who gave it to us. We were kids. It's not a millennial's fault that they were all given trophies. Those things we like to criticize, that was the boomers, right? So like, we got to take some responsibility, I think, for the world we've created now, where we're in a really pretty historic move to every man for himself, the US in particular, and it's tearing us apart. It's incredibly dangerous.
Andrew, to conclude our interview, let's try to end with a positive note. Can you give us a success story in terms of sustainability? Can you give us an example of an organization or a company that did extremely well?
There's lots. And so the book was co-authored, I should have said, with Paul Pullman, who ran Unilever for a decade and was really the most recognized and I think awarded CEO in terms of moving a company towards sustainability, and was one of the great CEOs, has been one of the great CEOs. Unilever's done a lot of great work. They're not perfect. They have products that aren't perfect. They have plastic packaging, right? There's things that go wrong, but they have done a tremendous amount on both environmental and social issues where they've tackled emissions and carbon use and moved to renewables. But on the social side, they've tackled bigotry. They'll run ads and use their brands to connect people in India, Hindus and Muslims, or help support LGBTQ and trans rights. There's been all sorts of social things, and in their supply chain, helping improve the lives of the people farming, our products, our tea, our palm oil, et cetera. Unilever's done that for years. There's companies like the tech giants, Microsoft, Google, and others that are moving to renewables incredibly quickly. They're working on carbon sequestration. They're really moving the needle on clean energy. There's a ton going on at the big companies, and then, really millions of small companies and kind of grassroots efforts where you just see a generational difference, especially younger founders starting companies with sustainability at their core, trying to make products that really help people and are healthier to use. So I think there's just a rising level of expectation from the way companies operate and the products we use. And on an optimistic note, the technologies we need to build a thriving world are much more available and drastically cheaper. It is just cheaper to build renewable energy now, almost everywhere in the world. Technologies for efficiency, for water management, there's just so many that are making the world better. And so we have this incredible opportunity. And I think the final thing that gives me optimism is really the way the younger generations are approaching this, which is they clearly see that government, business, civil society should be building a thriving world. And they have very strong opinions about it. They can mobilize. They demand more of us, their parents. They demand more of the companies they work for and buy from. And it's working. It's changing business. It's even changing the finance world. They're feeling pressure from younger customers. I hear it. I see it. I see the stats. It's happening. So we're going to move in the right direction. It's just about how fast can we go?
Andrew, can you lift the veil for our listeners? What is your next project?
A book takes a while, frankly, to kind of move through the world and percolate. And our book's selling really well. It's been out 4 or 5 months. We're launching 10 to 12 new languages of the book. And we're really trying to build a movement. We're working with many people in the academic community. The book's being adopted in schools. But more than that, we really want to try to change the way things are taught in business school and economics and undergrad as well, so that people are coming out of these schools thinking about the systemic problems we have, thinking about collaboration in the way we need to, and really challenging that profit-first model that really has run its course and is now just causing damage. So there's all sorts of things we're doing to try to build this as a movement. And in general, my work is trying to challenge the story, the narrative that we've been told, that if we just all try to make as much as we possibly can, we'll just be so happy and the world will be better off. It's a failed philosophy, and it really is killing us. And it's really driven power into, let's be honest, a very small number of hands. And that's probably always been true, but it's even more true in the last 40, 50 years, just more wealth in the very, very top. And it's just not sustainable. It's not the world that we need, and it's not the one that I think we can build, where the economy works for everyone and everyone has a chance to thrive. We can build that. We have the resources to do it.
Still a lot of work that we need to do.
Oh, it's a tremendous amount of work.
Andrew, thank you very much for being our guest today. Wish you a lot of success with your wonderful project. And thanks for participating in the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust Talk. We would be very grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher. Don't miss out on future travels around trust and subscribe to this channel or visit us on our website, trusttalk.co, or on Twitter @TrustTalkCo. We look forward to seeing you again.